Welcome to the Better You podcast. My name is Ian Bickle and I want to help you create a happier, healthier, more energized and successful version of you. The Better You podcast is all about exploration and growth. I'll be speaking to people that can give us lessons and principles we can apply to our own lives. I want to empower, educate and give you the freedom, energy, mindset and autonomy for you to take back control of your life. Thank you for listening. Make sure you subscribe, share and leave a kind review so we can share the positivity. Let's get into it.
All right. Well, looking forward to another great conversation here with my friend Ian Bickle. And if this is your first time catching this episode either on Ian's podcast or my podcast, we've decided to have these conversations each week. I think it's actually for a couple of reasons. I think it's one to provide some good content for our listeners, to kind of broaden that, to share that content between both our podcasts and our both of our audiences, but also gives Ian and I a chance to just hang out each week and kind of talk about stuff since, you know, as I said, he is a good friend and we live on the opposite ends of the world. And unfortunately, we don't get to see each other often. So this gives us a chance to stay connected too. So hopefully you all will enjoy these conversations that we have together. And so, hey.
Hey man, let's be honest, Jeff. It's not about the podcasts at all, is it?
We're just recording our
that's just secondary. This is just about me and you. And you know what? The audience, they're just lucky to be part of this. So, you know, I'm forever grateful for your company. And, you know, sometimes we wish we were recording, you know, when we're having the conversation off air, you know, just about kind of all of these things, what we've been up to, what we're doing, clients that we've been working with, helping and all of that sort of stuff. But yeah, like I hugely value your input. And this is why I thought these podcasts would be really helpful, because usually we're interviewing people and experts about a particular subject, whereas this is an opportunity for us to just have a bit of crack, a bit of conversation, and, you know, to go whatever direction that we wish.
Yeah, definitely. Well, today we thought we'd start talking about hunger. So we were talking about kind of diving in and discussing some of the different intuitive eating principles, and which I think can be a really helpful thing. And so hopefully we'll be bringing in some different perspectives here, and I think this will be a great conversation. So we figured, you know, last week we talked a little bit about just rejecting the diet mentality, the problem with holding on to a diet mentality, why that's an important kind of a thing when you're engaging in intuitive eating, because getting away from dieting is not just not dieting anymore. There's these other principles. And so today we thought we'd kind of dive into basically the second principle of intuitive eating, which is honoring your hunger. So why don't you start off with some thoughts about hunger and why this is one of the key principles?
Well, obviously it's the second principle, isn't it? And often within this, you know, they do say, like, listen, this isn't like an order of importance, but usually with that first one, reject the diet mentality, you know, that kind of often underpins them all. But I think people have been conditioned to kind of ignore or try to suppress their biological hunger. You know, most diets is kind of based either on some level of restriction or restraint. You know, there's often this kind of, I guess, overarching conditions that are there in terms of just to maintain some sort of like body compositional maintenance, or if it's weight loss or something like that. So when it comes to honoring your hunger, usually people aren't doing such a thing, and hunger eventually will catch up. So I think us discussing all of the hunger nuances, the different types of hunger that people may feel, the sensations that they may have, where they may have them, because when I speak to clients about hunger, they automatically assume there's only one type of hunger. And that's the typical hunger we may feel within our stomach, a stomach rumbling and things like that. And then obviously get clients as well who just don't experience hunger until they get ravenously hungry.
Hmm.
So we got to maybe look at, well, why is the case with that? So with hunger, it is very much a kind of an open book, I guess, of going, well, let's maybe start defining hunger first and foremost, and then we
Hmm.
can start taking a look at the different types of hunger. Um, but this is something for me that I think is hugely important. Is like, is somebody being biologically fed? Because if they're finding their energy levels are kind of all over the place, and they are kind of engaging in some form of rebound eating or binge eating or
Hmm.
anything like that, that often is going to be my first port of call.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. I think often people don't realize that there's those different types of hunger, and that, like you were talking about there with the they don't recognize it until it's real extreme, and they don't realize that there are different ways of experiencing hunger. It's not just the growling in the stomach, and I think that that's an important thing to address, because that will address those different things that you were talking about there.
And that's the thing.
Uh,
Maybe there is different signals before it gets
mhm.
to that point. So
Yeah,
maybe the order of hunger, maybe the end point is like an extreme feeling in the stomach, but they're ignoring the kind of two or three things that lie before it.
yeah, yeah, and that's one of the things I know that we both do as coaches, is to help people recognize that. And it's funny. I know a lot of my clients have been surprised to find out that there are all these other ways of experiencing hunger. They never really had thought of it, like irritability, anxiousness, fatigue, brain fog, all these things that a lot of times in the fitness world, they would attribute that to, oh, well, it's because you ate sugar. It's a sugar crash. And it's like, well, maybe. I mean, maybe that's one part of it. But at the other end, you may not have been eating enough. And that's why you experience this crash in energy, because you got that quick fix from some sugar that kind of boosted up your energy and gave you that energy your body was needing, but then it went away very quickly and left you still feeling hungry. And you might be thinking, well, I'm not hungry, but yet your body feels like garbage, and that's another way of it telling you that it is in fact hungry, and it's not just the growling in the stomach or that emptiness feeling.
What for you? What do you feel when you feel hungry? What's your kind of sensations, Jeff? And do you kind of um do you realize what the kind of has led to that degree of hunger? Because I know you like
Mm-hmm.
myself like to have a kind of almost regular eating pattern, but
Yeah.
we live in the real world, and sometimes things happen. We've
Mm-hmm.
got family and other things go on, emergencies. So how do you feel it? Where do you feel it? And do you know the patterns that lead up to that?
Yeah, yeah, and that's a good question, and yeah, I do. The regular eating pattern, like you talked about, I know both of us are proponents of having that consistency with your eating pattern, and that it can be, a really helpful way of just regulating your food intake over the course of the day, because it allows you to experience a moderate level of hunger when you arrive at an eating occasion that you've had scheduled, which allows you to then make a good decision on what's going to be the amount of food, satisfying food, what's going to taste good. You're able to enjoy it more because you're actually somewhat hungry when you arrive, but you're not starving, so you're not shoveling it down. All of those kinds of things, and yeah, what I find is that uh, based on what I eat, I may experience a different level of hunger at the next eating occasion. So this morning, I was in the mood for cereal. So I had some cinnamon toast crunch stuff and milk. And then I almost had some eggs, and I thought, I'm not really in the mood for eggs today because I eat eggs a lot. And so I said, I'm just going to have a couple of bowls of cereal and that's it. But I also know from experience, because part of intuitive eating is being mindful and then also just remembering how different things impact you and checking in with yourself. And when you do experience something out of the ordinary, you maybe reflect back on what changed. Well, for me personally, I know that if I have cereal for breakfast and don't have eggs, then I probably am going to be hungry earlier, or I'm going to be hungrier when I get to my next meal or snack. And so I already know that since I had cereal for breakfast, I made that decision that it's going to impact my level of hunger later. And so I know I'm going to have either a more substantial snack, or I'm going to just arrive at lunch a little bit hungrier than I normally am, which is fine. It's not a bad thing. And I don't get frustrated or like beat myself up. I just, knowing that that's the case, I'm prepared for it. And so that's one way that I kind of understand how my hunger works. And then the ways that I'll experience hunger is that if I get really hungry, I actually get kind of a nauseous feeling in my stomach. So if my stomach starts growling and I'm feeling that nauseousness, I know I really allowed myself to get hungrier than I should have probably. Again, it's not a judgment thing. It's just yeah. And sometimes I expect that to happen too, which is fine. And that's often the case based on what I might have eaten at a previous meal. Another way I'll feel hunger is anxiousness. So I may feel this just kind of like an unusual sort of level of anxiety for no reason. And that just doesn't happen all that often. But and so that's why when it pops up, I'm like, what's that from? And then I'll sometimes reflect back and think, oh, I guess I completely forgot to eat lunch today. Didn't even realize it. It's 3:00. I didn't eat lunch, or I just had a snack. And so then I'll kind of go back and say, oh, okay, I guess I need to eat something. So those are the kinds of ways that I experience. Another weird one is I start burping, which is like I get these like intense burps. Like if I get hungry, it's weird. I don't know what that is, but it's just another
you want to
thing
get that checked out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is the good thing about this is like it is purely based upon like your experiences, and you're not carrying, you said it there, not carrying any judgment into it. It's almost like just from a place of curiosity and exploration with this, and the experience that you've likely had when you've kind of allowed yourself to get too hungry in the past is knowing how to avoid that in the first place, I guess. And I think this is one of the things is like, yeah, typically people might have some consistency throughout the week, particularly if they're working a Monday to Friday thing as well, but so maybe the energy expenditure is somewhat consistent. But of course, you've got to kind of, because I'm bringing this example around yesterday because like a client who was meant to be kind of on a Zoom meeting, he asked, "Oh, do you mind if we do a walk and talk?" Because he just hadn't been very active that day, and I was like, "Listen, that's absolutely fine. It's a sunny day. I'll take the dog out as well." But I hadn't kind of factored that in, and I know fine well I'm doing an extra almost like an hour's walk. That's energy expenditure. So I said to him, listen, because I'd just had lunch beforehand, I was like, do you mind if I just kind of, give us 5 minutes? And what I did was just put some jam on some chili rice cakes. Chili rice cakes are the best rice cakes, by the way. But like, just something like that, just knowing that I'm going to expend a little bit more energy. And yes, maybe like in the short term, it may not be noticeable, but like with hunger, it just kind of can get elevated. So just factoring that in and knowing, well, I'm going to be more active or I'm going to be less active. And this is why tuning into your individual hunger cues, but also knowing maybe the types of things that may stimulate it more, like additional activity that you didn't really factor for. You've got to realize like over the course of the week, if you've underfed during the week and then it gets to that Friday, and especially if people are purposefully dieting and they wonder why they're getting to this point and they've got
Mhm.
this biological deprivation, but also like this is why it feeds back to rejecting that diet mentality is like if you've got that emotional deprivation, also you're trying to cut things out because you're trying to be good,
Mhm.
you're going to get hit with a bit of a double whammy here because you do have emotional hunger that needs to be met and
Mhm.
that need to be met, but also you've got the biological needs that need to be met. And this is, I think, a problematic thing is when the diet doesn't provide you adequate nutrients and energy, but also when it
Mhm.
doesn't allow you the flexibility to choose what you want in the amounts that you want. This is where people can kind of start to feel a little bit lost and conflicted, and then inevitably it all becomes too hard, and then they just revert to type. Yeah, like I think with the different types of hunger, I feel it in my stomach,
Mhm.
but I can feel like an overall like tiredness within me, and I
Mhm.
know, and I tend to get a bit more food focused.
Yeah. Well, and I think that that highlights an important part of hunger. It's a biological drive, and one of the things we experience is the growling in the stomach, but not everybody does. Some people literally say they never have a growling in their stomach, and that's fine. But another way we experience hunger is this really indescribable drive to go get food. It's like you can't really explain it. You just like, I need, I just want food. I don't know why. I just want food. And I think it's that part of that gut brain connection that we have in our bodies. It's our body's way of telling us, I need energy. So go get some. And then there's other times where you're just sitting there and you're just not really interested in food. And that's because you've kind of connected with those satiety signals that are those other signals that the body has. It says, hey, I don't need anything, so don't worry about food right now. And if you're not in that deprivation mode, then you can actually listen to and respond to those biological cues. I think when you have the deprivation, the emotional deprivation, and that kind of a thing, it can be really difficult to ever get food off of your mind. If you're always thinking about the food that you can't have, even if you're stuffed and you're still thinking about food, that's a good sign that you probably have some deprivation going on or something in that area that might need addressed. If you can't ever stop thinking about food, regardless of how full you are, that that's kind of an issue, I think. And I mean, maybe this is a good time to bring up there's those four types of hunger that we sometimes talk about, and you actually kind of worked them all into your comment there a minute ago. But
I'm
the
good
the
like
four
that.
types of yeah, the four types that I was thinking about were the biological hunger. I think everybody's sort of aware that there's that kind, but then there's the taste hunger and practical hunger or planned hunger, which would kind of go along with what you were talking about with the rice cake. It's like you knew I'm going to be doing more activity.
Mhm.
Not that I'm hungry right now, but I know I'm going to need more than what I just ate. So I'm going to eat in plan of needing more energy, and then emotional hunger. And so, do you have any specific thoughts on any of those four types that maybe people might be less aware of or unaware of or just hadn't really given much thought to?
I think like for me, they all can mash together
Mm-hmm.
really, really well, because yes, taking care of biological hunger is important, but you still want to derive like pleasure from the food that you're eating. So, that taste hunger comes in. We're talking about like taste hunger in like let's say you are biologically fed, okay, but you're going out and there's some cake or there's some sweets going around and things like that, and you fancy one. And you
Mm-hmm.
fancy trying different things and like that. But I also think like making sure we're not having too bland of a diet. Like I want my clients to enjoy the food that they eat so that it doesn't feel like a diet. It shouldn't be. And
Mhm.
obviously as well for them to build up their library of kind of go-to foods, because this practical side of it comes in as well. We live
Mhm.
busy lifestyles, so having some like plan Bs in place that may not necessarily be like a kind of like, I don't know, a culinary marvel, but it might just be enough to kind of like tick the necessary boxes. But I think we
Mhm.
want to look at this as a whole and not feel like we are psychologically and emotionally restricted. And I think that's often like a problematic thing. So there is emotional hunger, absolutely, because like there's nothing wrong with emotional hunger unless it becomes like the only thing that a person has in their life to deal with uncomfortable feelings and things like that. So it might just suggest that person's life is out of balance. And a lot of these people who struggle with binge and emotional eating, food becomes the kind of the quickest, most reliable and kind of easily accessible source of comfort and
Mhm.
distraction. Um, and eventually that can build into like a very strong neural pathway when even in the beginning phases of feeling a certain feeling, they automatically jump to food, which
Yeah.
of course can be problematic because maybe they aren't dealing with their feelings, and not, looking at them with dealing with them with kindness, if you'd like, and that kind of
Mhm.
is another principle, if you'd like. And that kind of, for me, it's so important that, we're taking care of each and every facet, and that is going to be individual to the person. And I was like, from a surface level perspective, your nutrition might look like other people's nutrition, but it's the subtle undertone that is really important, and that's what allows ultimately consistency and enjoyment. Because if you feel
Mhm.
like you've got choice in this, you are choosing every aspect of your nutrition, and you are choosing maybe to have a scheduled kind of framework towards your eating because you know that it gives you, well, what you want from your diet, which is consistent energy, feeling satiated, having your emotional needs met, and it being enjoyable, tasty, and things
Mhm.
like that.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the bland diet, and I think that it's important for people to understand that we all are different on kind of what we like as far as our foods go, and that's um, where it's important to connect with those hunger signals of satisfaction, which is another principle we'll talk about another time. But some people are actually prefer more bland diet, and that's totally fine. It's when you start running into the I like I like a variety of foods. I like these certain types of foods. I like certain uh, other kinds of food that I have been restricting from myself because I think that they're quote not healthy. And so I think that that's where that problem comes in. That so many people are it's if you have a bland diet and that's what you like, then that's cool. But if you have a bland diet because you're afraid to eat anything that you enjoy, then that's where that problem comes in, and that's where you start to neglect some of these other areas of hunger, like the taste hunger or the emotional hunger. That the comfort food thing for a lot of us, there are certain dishes that provide us a certain level of comfort when we eat them. It's like, this just tastes good, this feels good, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's as you pointed out, if you're using it as your main coping mechanism, then that can be an issue. I was um, in a group the other day, and there was somebody asking a question about they this is a typical fitness weight loss type group that I'm still a member of. I've been in there for years, but I still hang around and try and offer a non-diet perspective whenever I can. But this person had shared how they've been on this, this very rigid weight loss diet for a period of time, and they've been losing weight and all of this stuff, eating, cutting out everything, and they haven't even had any of these typical foods that they would enjoy. And they said, "Oh, today I was tempted. I don't know where it came from, but I've been doing so good, and today I was tempted to go eat fast food." And the advice from other people in there was like, "Don't do it. Don't do it, man. You're going to regret it. Don't do it." And I had to come in and I'm like, okay, if, without trying to completely, diss everything that this person is doing, coming in and saying, it's food. Your body, there's nothing wrong with going and having some fast food. And I said, what you should do is check in with yourself. What is it that sounds really good? Is it just fast food in general? It probably isn't. But when you start depriving yourself and leaving out some of these other types of hunger, the natural inclination is to say, well, I just want fast food. And so you just go grab McDonald's, and then you eat it, you scarf it down, and you realize, I don't even like McDonald's. Why did I do that? I've really wanted Panera or Wendy's or whatever, whatever it is. And so my recommendation was, just take a minute and ask yourself, what is it that sounds good? What is it about it that sounds good? Is it the texture, the flavor? Is it just that I think I haven't had fast food, so I think I need to have it? I don't even really like it. Maybe there's something else that would be more satisfying. But anyway, getting out of that restriction mindset and just asking a few questions about the nature of this hunger, which I think was very much emotional type hunger. And kind of reflecting on that. And I think that that's an important thing when we're experiencing hunger of some kind or a drive to eat, is looking at what it is that would satisfy that hunger, whether it's biological, taste, practical, emotional, that kind of thing.
And the principle is called honor your hunger. So,
yeah.
The key word is honoring it. And the longer you deny yourself of these things, the higher that deprivation will climb, till eventually, like, you feel overly deprived. And this is where the cycle of can kind of really catch a lot of people out, because if you're biologically deprived, yes, there's certain things that we can kind of do mentally to kind of try to overrule that, ignore that, get through it. But that is going to be a willpower and discipline kind of focused energy. And as we well know, especially with a lot of people, certain situations are going to deplete that. Now, when I was in bodybuilding, like, I only just focused on bodybuilding. Like, I didn't have a family, I didn't have this, that, and the other, so, and I didn't have like the stresses and the things that I have right now. So you have to learn to adapt and have this self-compassion to where you are in your life right now and things like this. But I think when people try to take this just singular approach towards their pursuit of health and let's be honest, often weight management, they typically become undone. And especially if they're going back to methods that maybe they tried or that they perceived as being successful, but that was in a kind of a different life, different context, different values as well, and things like that. Now, with this approach, with intuitive eating, and the kind of the mindset-based stuff that we do around it is really about kind of amalgamating all of those sorts of things. The diet stuff, absolutely, but also like how it interacts with somebody's life and lifestyle. So if you are feeling that you are kind of having these diet thoughts and this worry and this anxiety, like for me, and with that person that you described there, that is going to eventually, the deprivation will win eventually. It always does. And the more you hold it off, the more you fight it.
Hmm.
That's just growing and growing and growing until it
Yeah.
will. And this, I call it like the pendulum, and that's when it starts swinging. And usually it goes in the other direction. People will break those rules, eat what they're not supposed to eat it without regard of satisfaction. It's not about that. Feel guilty, feel shamed, and then try and like go back to being good. And they might
Hmm.
spend a few days kind of getting it out the system, and then obviously they deprive themselves again, and they find
Yep.
themselves cycling between these two things, and
Hmm.
it's almost like you're setting yourself up for failure in the long run,
Yeah.
and how do we kind of make sure that this doesn't happen in the first place? Well, again, it goes back to what we spoke about last week, is like, right, well, how about you recognize that dieting in the first place is often a big problem, which is going to interfere with listening and honoring your hunger, because and that could be something we'll talk about, is like how restraint eating does that.
Yeah. Yeah. It really does. I mean, that's what that restrained eating teaches you, to ignore your hunger. And I see that a lot in some of these other, I'm in a couple of these big fitness groups, and a lot of it is I like to keep up with what people are talking about, what some of the trends are. It when it helps me to stay connected with and better understand where people are really struggling with the dieting mentality. And I see these kinds of things all the time where people are just hunger is looked at as something that, if you have discipline and self-control, as you should as a man, right? You should be a disciplined, self-controlled man, and that's part of being a good, strong person, which it is. I mean, they're good quality character traits to be self-disciplined and to have self-control and willpower and delayed gratification and all of this. But at the same time, when we apply that to food, and we can take it way overboard. And so we start to say, well, if you're hungry, then you need to have the willpower to muscle through that, because you need to stick to this calorie target that you've given yourself. You've given yourself a 1,500 calorie target, and you need to stick to it. You need to stick to what you've committed to, and all of that kind of mentality. And instead of saying, well, what's my body telling me? It's telling me that 1,500 calorie target's not even remotely the right thing. So I'm being disciplined about something I shouldn't be disciplined about. And I think that's kind of uh, a big problem, and it teaches us to not honor our hunger and to disconnect from it, and to listen to those external uh, that external voice that's telling us when we should eat and how much we should eat, instead of listening to the thing that actually knows that, which is our body, telling us what it needs.
Yeah, and I think as we said last week, the diet world wants to keep you in it, right? And
Mm-hmm.
all it does is you'd said it yourself. I was going to say it creates further disconnect,
Mm-hmm.
and that erodes things like self-trust and ultimately like self-worth, because if you keep feeling this thing that you believe is a discipline and willpower thing, and that tells you that you have none of those traits, um in this world that is so kind of like driven towards like performance. And I think as well, when people are I find it all the time with business people that I work with,
Mm-hmm.
those are like amazing at what they do, but they try and use the same mentality that they've used in business to this, which is like very, driven, no messing about. And again, like I say, yes, you have to, like I use this, you have to want it. You have to want to kind of be healthy and things like that. That's great, okay, because I want that. But like
Mm-hmm.
when you take that you have to want it mentality in the wrong way. And that means like doing all of this stupid stuff, over exercising, over restricting, being like having zero flexibility. Well, that just doesn't work, and you will burn out. And I find most
Hmm.
people anyway, they burn out in business eventually anyway. Like the
Yep.
body will tell you, and that's going to tell you in a big way by you kind of exactly what I said, burning out in some sort of fashion, getting excessively fatigued, feeling demotivated, feeling tired, feeling like in the hunger sense, like ravenous.
Hmm.
And then they binge, then they do all of these, they break these promises that they made themselves, which makes them feel even worse. But they
Yeah.
go back for it. They go back for more. And
Yeah.
it's like, is this not stupid? Is this not ridiculous that you keep doing this? Like, what is the alternative approach? Is there an alternative approach? And people are
Hmm.
keep jumping from variations of the same thing rather than kind of maybe taking a step back and taking a more, I guess, softer approach. And like
Hmm.
intuitive eating, I think a lot of people might be like, sounds a bit namby-pamby, right?
Yeah.
It's like a
Oh
bit,
yeah.
and like I think a lot of people are like, they've got this like hardcore, oh, I've got to feel it. When I'm trying to like get in shape, I want to feel hunger because I need that instant feedback that
Yeah.
something's working.
Hmm.
It's like people who work out, like if they've got to feel like they've been kicked to absolute hell. And it's like, listen,
Yeah.
I've competed in natural bodybuilding, and it's about being consistent in the sweet spot.
Hmm.
But that sweet spot may change based on life.
Yeah.
So my recovery resources aren't what they were. I'm older, but I've got lot more lifestyle stuff going on. I've got a baby that doesn't really sleep fantastically.
Hmm.
So I've got to kind of adapt my training and my nutrition in many ways towards the situation that I'm in. Now, if I had a very fixed way of going about things that I've got to go to the gym X amount of times per week and achieve X amount of whatever, sets and reps and all of this,
Hmm.
and I've got to eat this way and
Yeah.
I've got to hit this many steps and I've got to do all of those things. It's like, there, my friend, is a recipe for disaster. And usually when one plate starts like wobbling, you know,
Hmm.
the rest start to do, and then you've got crockery everywhere, Jeff, and it's not a good thing.
Yeah. Well, it carries over into so many other areas. I mean, we see that, this idea that if something's not hard or it doesn't take a lot of work, that
Mm,
it's probably not really worth much. So this kind of mentality where if it doesn't take a lot of hard work, then why bother? And I a lot of people I think have that mentality with a lot of things, and it can be with really any area of their life. And so you try and run. It's one thing when you're talking about how you're running a business or something like that, but then you're trying to run your diet in the same way or the way you're eating, and you
mm,
think that you have to have all these little ducks in a row when in reality that's not necessary. And I think trying to force that on yourself is just it's going to leave you in this place where it's always going to be a sorts of contention in with your eating. And I think that that's where a lot of people run into issues, is just trying to overcomplicate things. You both of us, when we talk about our eating, it's like we have a fairly consistent schedule for eating, and we eat what sounds good, and we try not to get super hungry in between, but if we do, we just eat a little more. Just quickly think about,
mm.
hey, I have this coming up. I'm going to be a lot more active. I'm going to go ahead and have an extra snack, or I'm going to take this with me. And it really isn't all that complicated. And that leaves a lot more than headspace for the other areas where we do need to focus on maybe a bit more discipline, or where we have to maybe suck it up a little bit more. And if we can minimize the number of areas in our life where we have to do that, because
Mhm.
there are areas, you may have a really demanding job where you have to get up at 4 a.m. and you can't go to bed until midnight or whatever. And it's like, okay, that you may be in that, but if you're addressing your food and handling your food in that same kind of way, it's just going to make life so much more difficult. So if
Yeah,
you can simplify that by thinking, okay, if I'm hungry, I'm going to eat, and if I'm full, I'm going to basically stop eating. If something sounds good, I'm going to check in with myself and say, how much of that's going to sound good? Is this really what sounds good, or maybe something along these other lines might be better? Just I don't know. I don't think I explained that very well, but I think that it's really easy to fall into that trap of thinking we have to micromanage all of these different things. It
mm.
just overwhelms our brain when we're doing too much of that.
Yeah, and like, I look back in my history and things like that when I didn't know, like, and I was constantly looking for stuff, and like,
Mm-hmm.
the kind of mental gymnastics that go on, particularly in nutrition, and like we can look at like things like carb cycling and worrying about like peri-workout nutrition, like that
Yeah.
means work nutrition around the workout, and like
Yeah.
supplementation, what to take, when to take it, in what amount, and then like you go down just stupid rabbit holes, which just breeds more and more perfectionism. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and eventually, like, you just can't consistently do that sort of stuff. And I think when people start something, so when people start with me, I'll say, listen, right, I'll call it week zero, the sign up with me, and then between that time and our next call, usually it's a week or so, they're collecting a little bit of information, filling in some forms, things like that. But I say from the off, I'm like, listen, you don't start in a week.
Mm-hmm.
You've already started. So I don't want you to do the things that a dieter would usually do before they start a diet, because we're
Yeah.
getting you out of that world, which includes like, we've talked about deprivation, like eating or getting in all of the things that you think that I'm going to stop you from eating. And that's not what I'm about. I'm not about telling
Yeah.
you what you can and can't do and what you should and shouldn't eat. That is just diet culture,
Mm-hmm.
warping your perceptions and getting in the way. And people from the off are like, like first and foremost, like, oh, this is a new way of going about things. This is
Yeah.
different. And
It's
I
like
think,
there's nothing to get out of your system. It's like
yes,
you there, just so you know, where you're filling out forms this week, but there is nothing to get out of your system because I'm not taking anything away from you. So just
and,
no
and I,
need to say go off the rails.
and I think that's one of the things maybe that people come to us expecting is
Mm-hmm.
like, right, they're going to control me. And I'm like, actually, no, what we're going to do is give you a more freedom. We give you more freedom, more choice, more understanding, and for you to understand what you need to understand, and also not worry about the things that you don't need to know. And I think like us going down the rabbit holes that we went down, and the certifications that we've done, and all of the kind of evidence-based, science-based stuff, like for
Mm-hmm.
us to almost come full circle and be like, oh, like actually, like it's great that I've got that underpinning stuff, absolutely. But we said last week, how often are we talking about subtle nuances around, you know,
Mm-hmm.
nutrition? And it's like, do we need that degree of, you know, do we need that level of detail just to be healthy, just to be kind
Yeah.
of normal? Like that stuff is reserved for like more advanced trainers. Like I would say stuff like tracking calories and macronutrients and things like that. It's overkill for like
Mm-hmm.
99% of the population.
Right. Yeah.
it's unnecessary. And as well, if you're using it for the wrong reason, which is often to keep control, um,
Mhm.
it's like, well, people when they can't track things, well, what do they tend to do?
Yeah. And it disconnects you from that hunger because now you're letting this app tell you when you can eat. It's like, well, I've hit my target, so I guess I can't eat anymore. Or, oh, I haven't hit my target yet. It's 10 o'clock at night. I was going to go to bed, but I still need to eat X amount to get my target, that kind of thing, instead of just listening to and honoring your hunger. We're kind of coming up toward about the end of kind of our planned time. What I get kind of hesitate in bringing this one up because we try not to encourage people to think about weight, but people are they're still hung up on weight and managing their weight. And one thing that I think can sometimes be good to just mention, because people still have that fear that if I do this, then my weight's just going to go up and up and up and up and up and up. But what has your experience been personally with honoring your hunger? Because I know with mine, um, honoring my hunger, feeling fullness, eating for satisfaction, all of those kinds of things, following an intuitive eating approach, my weight stays extremely consistent over the years. So, I mean, I weigh the same as I did in 2019, and it's now 2023. And so, give or take, a few pound fluctuations over the course of that. But have you seen that? Have you experienced that similar kind of thing yourself? And then also, do you see that weight stability in a sense with clients as you're working with them, where they once they start to connect, they just really feel like, yeah, my body is now kind of coasting along much better.
Yeah, I think really to get like a decent like understanding of your body is to take like an annual approach to it. Like you're going to eat differently, maybe to summer, to winter,
Mm-hmm.
to spring, just so I think having flexibility within that and knowing yourself over the course of many years, like my weight, I can't remember the last time I took it, but if I had
Yeah.
to guess, I'm probably between like the 86 and 90 kilo range. And, typically that's where my body just kind of settles.
Mm-hmm.
And I trust my body. I trust
Yeah.
myself around food. Like I will occasionally overeat,
Yeah.
but and it's not done in an emotional way. Yes, there's enjoyment and satisfaction in there, absolutely. So there is emotions involved, but it's never like that, what the hell effect of like kind of right, I'm going off on one. Um, like every Friday we have pizza night. We love pizza night. And yes,
Mm-hmm.
I eat more, but like I trust my body and I trust my appetite regulation. If the next day I'm not like as hungry as I would normally be because I've had that greater amount of food, and it's like, your weight is designed to go up and down. It's
Yeah.
totally natural across a week, across a month, across a year, across a
Mm-hmm.
lifetime. What we don't
Yeah.
want to do is get to the end of our life and think, what a waste of just like all of this dieting, like
Mm-hmm.
rubbish, which ultimately led me to miss out on things like in life, eating the food and enjoying it and deriving satisfaction from it. So I think
Mm-hmm.
for a lot of people, the fear of weight gain, it's kind of like in many ways, can we put that on the back burner? One of the
Yeah.
analogies I like to use with clients is like, listen, if we're building a house, if we're building a big, strong structure, the first thing that we do is we go down. We build the infrastructure, we put the electrics in, the plumbing in, and things like that. It's no good just building a house, which most diets
Right.
do, but then there's nothing there keeping it in place, and like it's not livable. Whereas with this, we kind of take an alternative approach. And as you mentioned earlier, a lot of people they want that instant gratification. And as we know from like research, like if people feel in the early days they're winning,
Mm-hmm.
fantastic. Like, um, but if people are still carrying that dieting mentality into intuitive eating and they are just doing it exclusively for weight loss and they
Right.
don't experience that,
Mhm.
um, you know, that can be a kind of signal for them to like panic. And
Mhm.
they are just using it as another diet. Like, oh, I tried
Yeah.
that intuitive eating diet. It's like, what? Like
Yeah.
it's it clues in the title. It's intuition. Like
Mhm.
it's not a diet, you know, like you took a dieting mentality into that and you've just labeled it a diet again. And it's kind of
Yeah.
like again, and it all stems back to that dieting mentality, I think, for a lot of people.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. And I think it's important people understand that the research does support intuitive eating as an effective way for people to live in the body that is right for them. It helps us to eat what our body needs and not excessively and not less than what it needs. And that is a great place to fit. You know, you mentioned kind of that weight range where you tend to sit and that your body just naturally kind of hangs out there. Mine does the same thing. And I see that with clients too, is once you get those disruptors out of and deal with those disruptors, because I think usually when if your weight is fluctuating a lot up and down and dramatically, that there are probably some disruptors in there. It could actually be an illness, you know. That's something
Yeah.
too that people, if there are some issues going on, it's get checked out with your doctor. But in general, if we can address those foundation things like you were talking about with the house, it's like, yeah, you can build a house on just a flat dirt
Yeah.
area and it might look amazing, but then it rains and the dirt starts shifting and now that beautiful house is going to just collapse. And I think that one of the cool things with hunger is that it's one of those foundational
Mm.
components that if you can get that dialed in, so to speak, if you can get to where you're actually honoring your hunger and recognizing it and noticing when your body needs things. And then of course we'll talk about another principle another time, the fullness aspect, which is kind of the other end of that. When you have those things in place, it makes it much easier than to be confident that you can listen to your body and know when it needs something and when it's had enough and all of those kinds of things. And that's ultimately going to leave you in a place where your body
Mhm.
is has what it needs.
And before we end, like, you know, I want to, and I think I know the answer to this, Jeff, because it's probably the same for me. Is it hard for you to regulate your body weight, your body composition in the range where it's at right now? Like,
No,
yeah, is it an effort? No, you know, it's the
no.
same for
And
me.
and there are certain things that are I have certain disciplines in certain ways that are there. It's not a rigid thing, but like I
Mm,
try and make it to the gym a few times a week. And
mm,
those are so there's certain physical activities, but I enjoy that too. So that's not something everybody has to do.
yeah.
But in general, I like to be active. So I do all my own yard work. I could pay someone to do it, but I kind of enjoy doing that. And it's a way of staying active. And so there are some things that I put in
Mm,
place to keep my body at a relative level of physical activity, which I think helps with all of those kinds of things. But in general, yeah, I just
yeah, you just you.
it yeah. And I'll have to say, you know, when I was in my dieting days and I maintained a lower body weight than I'm at now, that took a lot of work. I mean, I
Yeah,
had to track everything. So I was able to maintain it, but I could not really deviate for very long from that. Every Christmas, what would happen at Christmas, I would gain weight because I would say, well, it's the holiday. I'm not going to worry about tracking. So as
yeah,
soon as I got away from that rigidness, then my body shifted back to where it normally likes to sit, which was interesting. But then I'd go back to that rigidness and it would, yeah, and it wasn't as enjoyable. I didn't have as much headspace. I was also much more tempted to make sure I got my workout in,
yeah.
even if I had something else or if I wasn't feeling good, if I was injured. I would still go ahead and do that because I knew if I missed too much of that. So it's just this whole different mindset shift now, where when you take that meticulousness out of it,
Mm.
my body feels great where it is. Is it as lean as it was then? No, but it's still, but I feel better. I have
Yeah.
more energy. Um,
More
everything
time,
just feels better.
you
Yeah.
know. And when we say more time, it's like time to think about other stuff, meaningful things. I'm the exact same. It's like, and that's kind of the definition really of that restrained eating, is like there's you're doing something, you're constantly doing and thinking and kind of almost planning and all of this sort of stuff. Whereas like I know fine well, if I wanted to maintain a lower range, that for me requires effort. And you
Mhm.
know what? I'm not bothered. Like, and I would be considered a healthy person, you know, like, but like as we said last week, healthy is multifaceted, and you know,
Mhm.
different things are going to be prioritized at different stages. I've
Yeah.
found myself in the sweet spot where I believe it's kind of for me perfect.
Mhm.
I require zero effort to maintain what I'm doing. I go to the gym on average the amount that I do, you know, and that's the thing. It's about that consistency rather than perfection. And
Mhm.
averages win out all of the time. And what you do on
Yeah.
average really counts the most. So, you know,
Yeah.
it if you have a chocolate bar or a pizza night or whatever, or a glass of wine and some alcohol and things like that, well, what's the big picture look like? You know, if you're putting it in this, looking through it through a microscope and only looking at that, which a lot of people
Yeah.
unfortunately do, it's
Mhm.
bad, it's unhealthy, it's wrong. You might get the people asking you when you're out eating, oh, should you be doing that? I thought you were healthy. You know, but they are like kind of building up an image of
Yeah.
your entire world based off what they just see in front of us. I think we can go on for another 20 minutes, half an hour, Jeff. So
Yeah.
you can wrap it up, mate. You can wrap it up.
Well, yeah, I think a good way to wrap up is to say, taking an approach like this, like you were saying, it's effortless. And I think some people would think, oh, that's because you're lazy. And that's not at all what it is. They're like, I'm not lazy. I work hard. I work hard in many areas. I work hard when I go to the gym. I put in a lot of effort in my workout. Whatever the case is, but when we're putting in tons of effort into something that is a losing battle, which is fighting your body's biology in many cases, that that makes it extremely difficult. And also going in with the mindset that the only way to be healthy is to have this excessive control over this area of your life. I think there's a place for self-control and discipline, but that can be taken to the extreme. And I think that's what dieting generally does, is it takes it to the extreme in an area where it's unnecessary. You don't have to meticulously control everything about your diet, because you have these awesome mechanisms in your body that when you're connected with them, that they will tell you when to eat and when to, and so it is very much effortless, like you were describing there. And I think that that's an
Yeah.
important thing for people to really latch on to.
And finally, I think like to get to this point
Mm-hmm.
requires like a certain degree of effort. You know, you
Right.
have to,
Mm-hmm.
you know, like this is why we coach this and coach people within this. You know, we're not just go eat intuitively and then that's it.
Yeah.
Oh, cheers for that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we are coaching people to the point that it does become effortless because like I think upfront diets are easy because they have like boundaries and
Mm-hmm.
rules. It's on a sheet of paper. Whereas what we're doing is we are coaching people in the nuance. And I was going to say this earlier. In many ways, it in the beginning, this stuff is hard, and this is
Oh
why a
yeah,
lot
for
of people
sure.
avoid it. You know, because
Mm-hmm.
it takes time, and people are like, "What? Sounds like it's going to take a lot of time." And I'm like, "Trust me, 10, 20 years are going to pass, and you can do that yo-yo dieting yourself into a worse situation, or and you look back going, oh, I wish I'd actually like done a proper job. and, maybe, yes, invested a little bit more money, but like, how much do you spend over that 10, 20, 30, 40-year period to be no further forward versus this, which is actually about personal self-development. Any decent coach is going to look at other areas of your life as well, because that stuff matters in how it's influencing, your behaviors around food and things like that. So we have to align everything. And that's why, that's why personally I love working with like people on a one-to-one basis, or I like to have people within their circle involved in this process as well, because like it's important that they understand what the client I'm working with is going through, and it's important that that client tells the people around them to kind of, and that's again another principle of challenging the food police, and that's another time for another episode. But Jeff, I said we're not going to go on for another 20 minutes, and we're doing it. We
better stop. We better stop.
So if you enjoyed today's podcast, subscribe to them both, okay? Share them around, get people to listen in. Of course, reach out. You can find us on our socials. There's not many Ian Bickles in the world. I'm sure throwing Jeff Ash into the Google machine will kind of bring his handsome face up. But yeah, thank you very much as always, Jeff.
Yeah, thank you too.
Thank you for listening to the Better You podcast. If you've taken a huge amount of value from this, which I'm absolutely sure you have, please share it around, send it to a friend, send it to a family member, even a colleague. Remember, building the best possible version of you is going to be 100 times easier if those around you are trying to do the same themselves. If you would like an additional bit of help, support, guidance and accountability, you can just reach out to me. My website is buildwithbickle.com, or you can send an email, ian@buildwithbickle.com. Also, share the podcast on social media, tag me in it. I would hugely appreciate that. Thank you again.